So, good morning to those in Europe. Good afternoon to people listening in China or in Asia. Welcome to the EU SME Centre webinar, where you will have the opportunity to learn about the challenges, but also the opportunities on the ICT market in China. Before we go, let me remind you that the European Union SME Centre is funded by the European Commission, and it's a project which helps EU SMEs to prepare to do business in China, providing them with a range of information, advice, training, and support services. The center is implemented through 6 partners. You can see them in the screen that help us to deliver the target which is in our scope. Before presenting to you our speaker, our expert, let me also remind you that you can submit questions all the time. Some of the questions will be answered throughout this session. Some others will be answered later in our webpage. And I remind you that anytime a new question arises, you can always go to our webpage and ask the expert. Now, let me introduce you to our expert today. The person that will chair this webinar is Mr. Kirk Wilson. He has extensive and deep expertise in both China and the ICT market. And we met last week to review this webinar, and I can assure you that you are in very good hands. Now, I'm passing the microphone to Kirk. Welcome, Kirk. It's all yours.
Thanks, Raphael. Let's put that there. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to move on to the next slide. ICT obviously is a very broad market, so today we're going to try and cover a lot of ground. Please feel free to make me move along if I'm rambling too much on one particular point. I'll have a quick look at the agenda. First of all, I'm going to give a quick overview of the China ICT market. We're going to talk through various subsectors, but not in a lot of detail. In the second section, I'm going to go into more depth in each area, and in particular focus on the opportunities for EU SMEs. So we've identified a few existing EU SMEs that are in the market, and we'll talk a little about the experience and the opportunities that they're looking at. I'll then go through a few case studies on best practice from companies that we know are here in China and have perhaps been here for a bit longer time and maybe started small, but have grown into quite successful businesses in China, and talk about some of the best practice. I'll then give a summary of some practical advice that we've picked up, both from those successful companies, those case studies, but also from the EU SMEs that are here just beginning to do business, and some of the challenges that they've come across. And I'll try to give some practical advice about how you can overcome those, or how you should prepare. That'll be in the form of a quick 10-point plan. Finally, we'll have a section for questions and answers. So please feel free to think of any questions across your industries. I appreciate that this might be a very broad audience, and we've put a question out there to begin with about the subsectors. So I'll get to know a little more about that as we begin. So on to the first section, the quick overview of the ICT market in China. As I said, it is a very broad scope that we're addressing today. I've put a quotation here from the ITU of the United Nations, that what we're talking about when we talk about ICT is any equipment and services related to broadcasting, computing, and telecommunications, all of which capture and display information electronically. There are so many new paradigms recently in this space that sometimes it's hard to sort of understand what ICT really does cover, but I think that's a great explanation. We are going to touch on areas including telecoms OTT, also fintech, which we've looked a lot at recently. We've had some gaming, EU SMEs interested in gaming and mobile platforms, so we'll touch on those. There are lots of areas in particular around wearables, big data, these new paradigms that are very popular, and a lot of companies would put themselves in these areas. But fundamentally, when we talk about ICT, we can still structure it around the underlying technology areas, which are telecoms, hardware, software, and services. And that's the way we've structured the presentation today. Firstly, when you do business in China in any industry, the government is very important. I think anyone who looks at China becomes aware of that very quickly. So I'm going to cover throughout the different sections aspect of government involvement in different areas. And first of all here, I'd just like to, for your information, just to point out what are the key government departments. I won't go into detail. This is a slide you can come back to later just to refer. But basically, the MIIT, Ministry of Information, Industry and Information Technology, they regulate the wireless signal, the internet, broadcasting, communications, software, and electronic goods. It's the big, wide-ranging IT ministry in China. When you do business in a locality, though, you're more likely to be involved with the local Economic and Information Technology Commission, or the EIT or EICT, at the provincial and municipal level that will support and implement policy with specific and localized terms. They're the people you're more likely to talk to when you actually start to do business in China. The other few there are the slightly less relevant, but you will come across them. So MOFCOM, the overall Ministry of Commerce, NDRC, which is focused on, it's a think tank, which is focused on economic information and resources. So you can go there for links to all kind of statistics, but also links to investors and this kind of thing. And then the Foreign Affairs Office in the locality, which is, again, the more general outward-facing Department of Local Government. You'll deal with them a lot when you start to look at choosing a location. And then finally, a new one, the SIIO, the State Internet Information Office. And the leader of that is Liu Wei, who is leading on Xi Jinping's safe and controllable agenda, which we'll come on to a bit later on to talk about the impact of some of the policy coming out of that area. Okay, so moving on, the market size is big, obviously. I mean, it almost doesn't need to be said, some of these things. There'll be no question that the market is sufficiently large to merit taking an interest in China. GDP growth this year is at 7%. The way we refer to that in China is a new normal. We're used to growth in China of around 10%, and adjusting down to 7%. At first look, it can seem quite negative, but don't forget this is 7% on a huge economy which has a lot of activity, an economy that looks very different from 5 years ago. So 7% growth is still incredibly quick. So things are looking good. The IT market will potentially be worth about 200 billion euros, and the telecoms about 236 billion euros. And there are 400 million mobile phones were sold in 2014. So the total use of mobile phones now is almost saturated. Actually, I think it's something like over a billion mobile phones actually in use. So pretty much everyone in every area of China is now able to access the internet on mobile. And that's very important to note, because a lot of the IT services we'll talk about, mobile is a very key element of that. And China has actually leapfrogged in a way by not investing so much in the fixed line telephone network, but more in the mobiles. So you'll get people in very remote areas of China which have access to a smartphone, and they can do things like e-commerce, online shopping, and look at all these great online services, whereas they don't even have a computer in their home. So it's a very distinct thing about the Chinese market. Big data, we'll touch on that also. It's about 30% annual growth in China, including data centers and data analytics and what have you. The Internet of Things, very big one, probably the main thing to emphasize in this whole presentation. China is very, very keen on the Internet of Things across all the various genres, so smart city, smart home, automotive, and what have you. And this market is definitely going to explode. There are so many smart cities projects which need a huge amount of the smart cities aspects, and I'll get onto those a bit more in the hardware section. Some of the key growth drivers that are pushing this. Again, I'm emphasizing here the government involvement. So apologies, this slide is a little bit wordy, but I thought I'd leave some of these words on so you can have a look at them afterwards. The key ones I've highlighted in red there. So the government has an overall strategy, a 14-year strategy, which is the way they do things here, long-term planning. And they really want to push on ICT. That's something that all governments say, obviously. But the two key things to note here are they also would like to develop an indigenous, innovative core technologies, which basically means boosting domestic companies to be global champions. This has implications for foreign companies working here, which we'll cover later. They also want to establish a world-leading, reliable and safe information system, secure and controllable, as they call it. Again, these directives have implications that we'll come on to. One thing I want to say here is there are actually, in this case, opportunities for SMEs. This secure and controllable safe information system that the government is focusing on means that a lot of Chinese companies are looking to replace perhaps the latest technology with a slight step back, a different alternative technology, but which is more acceptable in terms of the safe and controllable. So there are opportunities, and we'll mention in particular one of those SMEs that is looking at programming for computer systems, perhaps 1 year or 2 years back from the cutting edge, that's becoming more to the fore as other players come into the market. China operates on 5-year plans, and this latest 5-year plan has a special focus on e-logistics, e-commerce, the traceability of agricultural products, epidemic surveillance, smart healthcare, and smart transportation. One of the pieces of advice that I'm going to give later and talk more on is when you are thinking about doing business in China, try to make sure that your business follows one of the key strategic emerging industries of China, because you'll get a lot of support in doing so if you can link into those. So it's worth knowing what are the key focus areas on the 5-year plans, because they will receive more, for example, government support and government financial and also policy support. The general macro opportunities, again, similar to other countries, but in China just happening in a much more dramatic way. So urbanization, the issue around the environmental conditions, a lot of focus on solutions that can solve that. The development of a healthcare system. So the healthcare system in China is not up to scratch, according to the government. So they are looking at all kinds of IT solutions across software, hardware, and telecommunications and services to address that space. China is a very big country, and a lot of remote healthcare needs to be delivered. So there's a lot of opportunities for working with remote healthcare systems, technical systems. Also the financial system, some element of development there, although that's already very well developed. Logistics is another really key one. So the big story of retail in China at the moment is e-commerce, and part of that is developing a logistics network that covers the whole country, so we can get all of these billion consumers that we all keep talking about, we can actually get them connected and buying stuff. So logistics is another big focus. And just a last point to emphasize here. Although we talk a lot about how advanced China is in terms of IT and things like Alibaba and e-commerce and cloud computing, what have you, nonetheless, Chinese business is a bit behind the curve. They've been quite slow to embrace the internet and the use of cloud solutions. As they do embrace it, productivity is likely to soar in the next few years, so there'll be lots of opportunities in that space also. There are also challenges in this market, obviously. I briefly touched on the information security strategy previously. So that's a leading group of Central Network Security and Implementation, and that's chaired personally by the President, Xi Jinping. So they attach a lot of importance to this area. Basically, the thing here is just to understand that these policies are there and to understand specifically what are the implications. So the practical advice here for the SMEs is just when you hear about these things, and you'll probably hear stories, as I put in the second point here, about companies being removed from procurement lists like Apple, Kaspersky, Symantec, and IBM. When that happens, it's often in a very niche and specific way, and there are reasons for it happening. So in this case, it's just best to talk with people, talk with Chinese partners, talk with other people in China, talk with experts like ourselves, obviously, from CBBC and the EU SME Centre, about your particular industry niche. Because sometimes, although it looks like there's going to be quite a bit of impact, actually the real impact on your particular area might not be so much. So it's quite hard to unravel, but we can help you with that. Another challenge has been there's a fairly limited practical significance of the pilot free trade zones. So free trade zones in China has been a very big thing, and they've been very good for some areas of cross-border transactions. There was a focus on e-commerce and technology, but we're yet really to see what the full impact of that is. I actually very recently came across a company, as we were discussing this webinar, that is taking advantage of that. They're called Nolarity. They're on our list of SMEs, which I'll give you at the end of this webinar. And they seem to be doing quite well in Shanghai, taking advantage of this year. So we're going to do a bit more research on that. But currently, the practical significance is a little bit unknown. There's also a challenge in that previously, if we'd have done this webinar a couple of years ago, we'd have spoken a lot about the zero tax environment and where governments offer huge incentives for technology companies to be developing in China. This is still available in some areas, but it's reduced enough for us to say that it's the end of the low zero tax environment. It's not as big a deal as it used to be. Another challenge in the market is the high talent turnover rate. And also a lack of investment in training. When you come into the market and start hiring people, it will be wise to try and put in place an element of training if possible. A lot of the SMEs that we'll talk about today do that. One company, Sondrel in particular, that I'll talk about briefly in a case study. They're investing in this with the University of Nottingham. And this is really one of the key issues to look at when you come into the market, because you can expect there to be quite a high turnover of talent if we don't address that. Finally, the rising costs. I think with euro depreciation, as I understand, it is even potentially cheaper to hire in Eastern Europe right now than it is in China across the technology spectrum. So that's definitely one thing to be aware of. It's not so much a low-cost destination anymore. The reasons for coming to China are changing. There's a huge market, obviously. The quality is very good. The costs are still reasonable, but it isn't the low-cost destination that it used to be. Clusters. Clusters are a little bit different in China than they are in Europe. So this is not just an organic, natural kind of coming together of companies. This is more of a government-driven initiatives, and they're very important because in each area where they have established the cluster, you get much better support from the local government. That can include, notwithstanding what I said previously about the zero tax environment, that can include in the clusters very low corporation tax, almost no income tax for the leading people in the company, fantastic deals on land tax, very good infrastructure, a focus on investment in infrastructure. That funding comes from central government often, and also purposely arrange trade fairs on some scale to create cluster effects, if you like, but it's done more deliberately by the government. I'm just having a brief look at the background of some of the companies that have joined us today on the webinar, and they seem quite broad, so that's great. We've got a few from each of the key areas, so that's fantastic, actually. That means we'll can give an equal amount of time to each area. Oh, sorry, going back to that last slide, just one thing to note there, actually. On those different locations, Shenzhen, I want to emphasize in particular. So that is the hardware center. It's where Huawei is based, Tencent, ZTEs. I'm sure you're aware of these huge big companies. That is a really big focus area of the government right now. There's an additional range of policies that have been made available in Shenzhen, a real focus on free trade zones. It's right next to Hong Kong. It's the tech center of China, so it's a very key focus area at the moment, and that name will definitely come up. So I recommend you do a bit of research on the area of Shenzhen. We're looking at coming to technology in China. Value chain and key players. There's a lot of text here. Don't worry too much about looking at this now. I just really included it on there to give you an idea of some of the big names that are there. It's something we can come back to after the webinar. And this is also included in an ICT report that we're currently working on with the EU SME Centre to accompany this webinar. So you'll be able to get this information later on, and then have just a quick look at who are some of the key players in the area. In fact, I think this table might even be out of date at this point, so we'll update that in the report and you can have a better look. Okay, so looking more at the specific sectors. First of all, telecoms. The big story here is the dominance of the three big players. So China Mobile, Telecom and Unicom. There aren't any other big players in the market, but one thing I do want to emphasize here is that the competition is changing slightly. So first of all, in the traditional areas, the China Mobile there, you can see from the graphic on the right, was very dominant. In 3G subscribers, it's not the same. So they're quite even in the China market, although China Mobile does still have the lion's share there. These companies are all going global as well, and as they do, they're globalizing their services and their needs and requirements around the world, so there will be more opportunities to work with them. This is definitely a market that is in the process of opening up. Foreign players in the market, I've mentioned at the bottom, the usual players you might expect, I think, in any market. A couple of key things I want to emphasize here. Basically, what I'm saying on this slide is that the market is very similar to other markets, actually. It's not anything really big different. So SMS revenue for the operators is dramatically down. 3 and 4G are representing more and more of the revenue of these operators. And a very important piece at the moment is MVNO, the mobile network operators, and the OTT services, over-the-top services and internet services. In this area, we're actually covering a huge amount of services when we talk about OTT and internet. I can summarize that as just saying it's audio, visual media over the internet that isn't controlled by the operator. And I appreciate there's a whole world of information there that we'll come on to in just a second. Oh, sorry, going back to that slide again. One key thing to emphasize here, who is getting the MVNO licenses, so the mobile virtual network operator licenses? They're not traditionally the companies you may have thought about. So when we're talking about this market, it's worth having a very broad view of some of the players that you might get to cooperate with in these kind of services over the internet. So we have one here, net.cn, that's Alibaba, that's the e-commerce player. There's also a handset retailer, but then also local companies from different areas of China, Shenzhen and Guiyang also. In terms of opportunities, we've got a specific list here that might be interesting for EU SMEs. So first of all is network services and broadband routers. We actually have a company who's a member of China-Britain Business Council called Electronic Media Services, and they're a small company that's doing pretty well here. The key here is that the service that they offer is bonded routers. So they take the signals from, say, wireless, from 3G and what have you, and bond them together for a bigger, more powerful signal. Now that is a very niche area of this space. And that's, I hope, one of the themes that comes through throughout the presentation, is that in order to do well in China, obviously there are very strong Chinese players who work across the more broad swathes of markets, but finding market niches is very important. I also mentioned MVNO and over-the-top services, and I re-emphasize that here, but not just the MVNO, but also the MVNE, the enablers, who provide services to the new companies who've got the MVO licenses. As I emphasized, some of those companies are not traditional telecom operators, so companies like Alibaba and JD, and they don't fully understand the space of MVNO as yet. So they're looking for companies who can provide services to enable them to provide all of the overall comprehensive services that they want to provide. So systems integration, billing, and then looking at more innovative content and apps and traffic packages. And we actually have an EU company called Emerald Communications, who are working in that space. Apologies, my voice is just cracking here. And Emerald are interested in the area of business telecommunications. So they provide services to reduce the cost of business-to-business telecoms over the internet across countries. So again, a fairly niche area, and one that isn't being served by Chinese competitors. So they've found their space in China. Network security is also a very important area. I mentioned earlier the focus on the security of the internet that the Chinese government have. We have another SME company called WebSense, who provide services in that area. This is a more challenging area to be in, obviously, because foreign companies are less likely to get some of the licenses required to work in the security area. But the technology itself is required here in China, and companies that can provide that technology in an open IP environment and are willing to cooperate and comply with some of the requirements of working in that space, there are still lots of opportunities in the area of network security. One very interesting niche that I came across recently, I was in Shanghai meeting with a lot of technology companies as part of the Great Festival, where a lot of UK companies came over to China to look at opportunities in tech. And I met with a company called TXO Systems, not a European company, unfortunately, but I put it here as an example of an area I think has a lot of potential. So there's a lot of companies have legacy telecoms equipment, and they are not yet willing to invest in completely upgrading their overall assets estate. So they're looking to purchase older equipment to replace equipment as it comes to the end of its life. Now, of course, the big manufacturers are not so much interested in servicing and replacing old equipment. They want you to buy new. So there's a real market there for the recycling or reuse of old telecom equipment, and especially in China, because a lot of the companies are not very interested in making investments, perhaps smaller companies, not so much interested in making investments in whole new telecoms assets. So there's a lot of interest in how to recycle and reuse the old stuff. Finally, education and training. This will be an opportunity in all of our areas we'll discuss today: online training, online university degrees, consultancy, anything that's training someone in your area to be more expertise in a particular subsector is very, very valuable in China. There's a lot of companies making a lot of money through passing on expertise and talent. Hardware. The basic trend I want to emphasize here is that PCs overall are declining, 2.4% decline. Desktop shipments fell 21% last quarter. Apple's done very well, but that's an exception. It's in the luxury area. But this is really not a market that's growing in China. What is growing is Internet of Things. So we're talking about the wireless, the sensors, and the hardware and chips that go into Internet of Things, smart cities, smart automotive, and these kind of subsectors. This is growing hugely, and as I said earlier, the government's really got to focus on this area, so I expect that to grow dramatically. I made a note earlier about the government procurement lists. Cisco, Apple, and the other companies I mentioned earlier have been taken off the government procurement list, but one thing I want to mention here is that they're not banned in China or anything like that. So all that means is that they are not permitted for purchase for some key government departments, but this is not going to extend to all of the state-owned enterprises, and it's definitely not going to extend to commercial enterprises. So there's still very much a market for selling this kind of hardware in China. So the opportunities, a big opportunity for EU SME companies is definitely in integrated circuit design. We have two very big companies in the UK, ARM and also Sondrel. So that's not a big company, but they're doing very well in China. It's an SME actually. They are doing fantastically well by designing integrated circuits that the big Chinese manufacturers then use to manufacture the huge numbers of chips that then go into the mobile phones, for example. So you end up with a fairly small European company doing all the high value work, the design, the research. It's all very much based on the talent of the people that they hire in Europe. And then licensing into the big Chinese manufacturers. Of course, they work with them in partnership to design new chips. And there's a huge market for that currently as China seeks to build its own versions of mobile phones and other devices. Also, high-tech casings, a company called Laird, again, that we'll talk about a bit later in a case study. So this is a company that has found a fairly specific niche in anti-electromagnetic casings that go inside of the mobile phones. Again, China's really looking to boost its mobile phone production. So this is a company that started off working with some of the big global players, but as China develops its domestic players in this market, there's a huge and growing market for the little bits of niche technology that really bring the quality to those phones. Broadband routers, I mentioned already, electronic media services, of course, that's also a hardware opportunity, and the recycling and the reuse of old telecom equipment. Also in health tech, the devices for health tech is a very big opportunity in hardware. As I said, China's working to upgrade the health system fairly comprehensively across the country, and a lot of remote health is going to be a part of that. So the devices that go into those systems, very, very important. Education and training, re-emphasize that again. Education on new kit, education on new kinds of kit and how to use those in integrated systems is a hot market for that. Internet of Things. So this is the big one. RFID, radio frequency ID, the sensors, the wireless, and also the networking systems that go behind that. An absolutely massive market growing in China for this. ARM, a UK company, is already at the center of that, designing the IC. But it's not only that, it's also small companies like Newell that I've mentioned here. So Newell was recently purchased by Huawei. They're a company that are very involved in the signal standards and processing standards in IoT, and they make small devices that control the wireless and networking. So they were doing well enough and were close enough to developing those standards that Huawei actually took an interest and bought them. So that's another opportunity of China, is looking for that kind of investment. I mentioned earlier some of the challenges of working in China around secure and controllable networks. And of course, one outcome of this is that some of the Chinese players are looking to take the place of some of the big foreign players in key systems. So Huawei, ZTE, Digital China, Founder, these are all very professional, very capable, huge Chinese systems integrators, software, hardware companies, and they are looking to get in on some of those contracts that perhaps the foreign companies won't be able to do anymore if they can't comply with the new security rules. There's definitely an opportunity here for EU SMEs to supply some of those big Chinese companies with the core niche technology in the areas that they're not very strong at the moment. So I definitely recommend now is the time to be talking to those companies about what's possible in that area. I already emphasized the Shenzhen hardware ecosystem. Let me re-emphasize that here again, that the company that purchased Null, Huawei, are based in Shenzhen, and there's a big VC community there, an investment community, so it's definitely the place to be to take advantage of that. A lot of big Chinese companies are there looking at the rapid prototyping market. So this is really the place in the world right now to get small prototypes built quickly. There's a huge market in Shenzhen where you can just walk in and buy almost any kind of small hardware piece and system that you like. And it takes about 2 minutes to walk over there and get it and come back. Of course, you can get it delivered to your office or laboratory as well. So hardware rapid prototyping is really taking off in that area. Another interesting area, again, touching on security, is CCTV cameras. So obviously China's very keen on security, as we know, and they're installing a lot of cameras around the country. And small SMEs like Indigo Vision, it's a medium-sized company actually, UK company that simply makes those cameras, and they just make them to very good quality. So the installations that require the very best quality, like airports and other travel hubs, are very interested in just getting the best quality. So they're not so much interested in looking to a Chinese player, even though, of course, there would be the security implications. But it's worth investing in it and making sure that they get the right quality. So, I mean, as always, really, if you have a very good quality product and you've really put the R&D into it, there will be a market here in China for that. On a similar note, optical touch keyboards, a company called Neonode, a Swedish company that develops optical touch keyboards for many, many different installations or use cases. They're also doing quite well in China and finding clients here who just want that very best of quality that they simply can't find from Chinese competitors. Software. Software is a difficult market in China. Let's not beat around the bush about that. And there's still a lot of piracy in this country. And I think the trials and tribulations of Microsoft trying to work in China are a good indication of that. You probably saw in the news recently that Huawei was actually taken off a software procurement list for some government departments. So they're actively looking at alternative office suites for that. So this kind of government decrees can have an influence here, and piracy is a big problem. Nonetheless, there is still a very big market for foreign software to come in. I've emphasized on this side the split of the market. Just to make it clear that it's not all about office software. There's also fairly big market chunks for embedded software, IT consulting, IC design, as I said, systems integration, other software products. These are the areas that are really open for EU SMEs. So talking about some of those niches, we have a company called Paragon, which is, again, a member of the China-Britain Business Council. They're focused on logistics software. So I mentioned at the start of the presentation that logistics is one of these key threads of the government's 5-year strategy and their 14-year strategy for informatization. There's also the security company that I mentioned, WebSense. So they're very focused on this software related to security networks and managing those kind of networks. There's graphic processing software. So a lot of movies are being made, for example, in China now. A lot of movies, animations. There are also the big real estate companies that are looking to produce animations for their walkthroughs when they develop real estate projects. And a lot of opportunity for very creative, very high quality graphic processing software and talent also to provide that kind of a service. Fintech, financial technology, has been a very big market in China. This is somewhat impacted by some of these recent secure and controllable rules that I mentioned. I do re-emphasize that here now because fintech is particularly affected by that. Nonetheless, pretty much all of the banks in China use foreign financial trading software, security and encryption. And actually, one of the directives that recently came out of the government about requiring secure and controllable software systems was actually suspended. The implementation was suspended after a backlash from industry. And part of the reason for that is that the security and encryption of the foreign technology is very, very good, and the companies were not happy to put up with any substandard services. So it just shows that a backlash from industry can make the government change its mind, so that's great. And more to the point, that these financial technology systems are absolutely core to those industries. So there's definitely will be a continuing market there. Consulting, as I've said, any kind of consulting to help to develop the quality of software in China is very important. And let me join that with the bottom one, automated software testing. So another small European company called Test Plant, they actually produce automated software testing. So it's very low cost, but very effective and very high quality. So a lot of the Chinese software producers are interested to boost the quality of what they're producing, especially when they look at global markets. And there is a bit of a market in that niche for automated software testing. Embedded software, definitely a growing market here. So I mentioned the Internet of Things, and there's a huge amount of embedded software that goes into the devices that drives that. So anyone in that area will definitely have opportunities with all of the big hardware and Internet of Things companies in China that I mentioned earlier. Game design is an interesting area. There's a company called King Games, which made the Candy Crush saga, and they have come over to China and are looking at deals with Tencent and others. And of course, very big company, definitely not an SME, but a foreign gaming company doing well in China is Rockstar, who make the GTA game. Gaming in China has recently opened up. The sale of consoles used to be banned, and it just became legal. I think it was just a few months ago. So all of the companies, Microsoft, PlayStation, what have you, are in China, and they're selling their consoles at very low prices in order to encourage this industry. So I do expect game design and development to really take off in China over the next few years. Education and training, again, can't emphasize that enough. If you're in the business of providing training, consultancy, and education in any of these tech areas, then there's a huge market for helping Chinese companies to up their game. Automated software testing, I've mentioned already. Oh, actually, one thing that's not on the slide here, I've just put it on my notes though, one further company, Micro Focus. They are one of the companies that's taking advantage of the new opportunities presented by the Chinese companies producing alternative systems integrations and solutions because of some of the policies that have come out. So they're focused on software and solutions for mainframes and other sort of big data, big computing technology installations. And again, this kind of niche area that focuses on very small areas, but very high areas of technology, very high quality areas of technology is a booming market here in China. Services. Services covers a huge area. I've highlighted 4 of them here. So mobile apps, and particularly the mobile marketing aspect of that is 47 billion renminbi. E-commerce, 310 million shoppers, about 2 trillion euros in transactions overall. Gaming, also very huge, and then cloud, in particular software as a service. These are really all exploding areas in China and fantastic opportunities in all of these. Some of the biggest companies you would have heard of globally, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, JD, these are all areas all companies working in the services area. Just a point to note on that, though, of course, is that these estimates of the numbers do exclude very significant service areas. And actually, the EU SME Centre and CBBC are currently producing other niche reports in these subsectors, so gaming, e-commerce, mobile apps, smart cities, and others. So you can get more detailed information from those. Opportunities and services are fairly wide-ranging. One small EU company or medium-sized EU company that we're working with is called Skyscanner. So they have a very specific niche in travel e-commerce. There are other Chinese players in the market, very strong players actually, like C-Trip. But their specialism is more along the lines of the overall general market of selling train and air tickets in China. Whereas Skyscanner is very focused on the getting the lowest priced options from across a range of market options. So there's a nice niche there for the e-commerce aspect. Game design, I already mentioned King Games, Rockstar and others. There's a lot of small game design and also mobile apps development companies who are doing very well in China. The only thing to note here is that the China mobile apps market is quite different. So there's actually a proliferation of different mobile app stores in China. There are hundreds, actually, probably thousands, but only about 10 really key ones that have a very high number of users. Nonetheless, designing for all of those different apps and getting your app into those different areas can be a difficult process. The good news is there are a lot of service companies who can help with that. So it's definitely an area of some potential for small companies in Europe. IT outsourcing, I mentioned this company, Emerald Communications and Telecoms. They're a company that provide a service that goes on top of other things, basically. So it's the outsourcing of a particular niche part of a service rather than taking the whole one. Cloud services, an important thing to note here is that there are very specific rules about operating cloud services in China. For example, you must host all of the data in China and you must have a Chinese partner to host that for you and manage those services. As we said earlier, there are changing rules around the free trade zones, and perhaps in our next webinar on this subject, we can look more into that. As it stands currently, the advice is that you will need to be looking at a Chinese partner who can take over a lot of those services. And that's important for a cloud services company because you need to make sure that you still have control over all of the IP, which comes from all of the data from all of your users on the cloud service, to make sure that you can still monetize that and get all of the value out rather than pushing that over to the Chinese host. So it's very important to work out, make sure you have a very good contract that takes that into account. Also e-commerce operations, not the platforms. Amazon is not doing very well in China, and actually they just opened a store on Tmall, on another platform. So I think that's a very interesting note on the trend in e-commerce, is that it's very much dominated actually by one company, Alibaba, but also the others add up to a market share of about 99%. And there's really not any room for foreign platforms as it stands at the moment. I'm sure that will change over the next few years as these companies broaden their services mix and that domination starts to fracture. But as it stands at the moment, the real opportunity in e-commerce is to work as stores on Tmall or in terms of e-commerce operations, so providing back-end niche hardware, software solutions for those providers. Education and training, again, emphasize across all the areas. One particular niche that's been very successful for EU small companies is digital marketing. This is a very creative area, and in particular, it's something that you can consider an open IP environment. So it's all about creativity. It's all about producing, something that's new and relevant every day. So it's not something you can sort of copy the IP and then rehash it over the following years. So any industry where you work in, it really depends on the talent and the quality of the people who you've hired into the company. There's big opportunities. So we have many EU SMEs working in this area, like Red Ant, Reading Room, Biablu, and Chison Akusta. So we can touch on those a bit later also. Okay, a couple of very brief case studies on best practice. First one is Laird. I've mentioned these already. This is a fairly big company now in China. It started pretty small, though, in the beginning. And I spoke with them this week about, what has been their secret of success. So Laird now have about 6,000 people in China. They've done very, very well. And as I said, they provide a really niche piece of technical kit for mobile phones, an area that's booming in China, and China's looking to produce its own lot of mobile phones. So they actually emphasized to me that there are two key lessons that they've learned since they've been here. One is always be close to the customers. So they design their own components in California with their main clients, and they design and manufacture also in Shenzhen with their main manufacturing client, which is all part of the same deal, but is a different company. And the point to make here is that you need to be close and you need to have face-to-face contact with your clients where possible. It's very important in China. The second they emphasized was use trade support services. I'm happy to say they found that the EU SME, UKTI, CBBC, and what have you were extremely valuable. And that leads on to the third point they made, that a key thing is the first person you hire. Make sure that you hire the right local leader who really understands the market, whether that's as a consultant or in-house, because there'll be lots of complex situations that come up that you won't be able to deal with from abroad. So it's very important you have someone on the ground who is local, who really understands the market. A point to make here is that, sorry, just going back to the previous slide, one of Laird's key milestones was that they were granted a high-tech status by the Chinese government. This is a very important label given to companies, Chinese and foreign companies. And if you can qualify for high-tech status, then you get a huge amount of support from the Chinese government. I've just put this slide in here. I won't go through it in any detail. It's just to give an example of some of the incentives that are available if you can qualify for this kind of status. It is available for smaller companies as well. So it's worth looking into what are some of these incentives that you can qualify for. Second case study is Sondrel. As I said, this is a company in IC design, so integrated circuits, another booming area in China. And they design customized chips for the big semiconductor companies, predominantly large multinationals who produce products like laptops, mobiles, and network processors. So there are two keys to success, as they mentioned to me. One was location balance. So it's fine to choose one location and be focused on that, but it's worth looking at all of the benefits of all the different locations. So yes, they're in Shanghai because it's a center of IC design in China, but they're also in Xi'an because they've heard about it being a growing center for IC design, and they get much more government support in that area. So for some aspects of their business, they like to have people there also. They also decided to have a lot of contact with Shenzhen to benefit from the rapid prototyping and the benefits of the incubator incentives that I mentioned earlier. Both of these companies have done fantastically well and are now very successful foreign companies in the Chinese market. So what about EU SMEs in China? Well, there's a lot, and they're doing very well, which is the good news. There are lots of opportunities. I think I've mentioned most of these during the presentation. It's worth noting that 4 of them that I picked out here are in digital marketing. So these kind of creative areas where you rely very much on the creative talent of the people in the company can do extremely well in China. But also IC design for the Internet of Things, Micro Focus that I mentioned, looking at their niche in mainframe solutions for the big providers, CCTV, security aspects, so Indigo Vision, looking at that area. The very niche area of automated software testing with Test Plant and also NeoNode. Nolarity is actually the Indian company that I mentioned. They're into online call handling and they're working in the free trade zone. We'll keep an eye on the development of that company to learn more about the effectiveness of those trade zones, and then Paragon in logistics software. So finally, wrapping up, what are our practical advice for EU SMEs coming to the Chinese market? These 10 I've put together here are distilled both from the lessons learned by the larger successful cases, Laird, Sondrel, and other companies, but also from the SME experience. So I spend a lot of my time talking with a lot of these technology SMEs and trying to help them overcome some of the issues that they face in the China market. We're pretty well versed in what are some of the common areas that they find difficulty. So going down the list from here, number 1, find niche markets. It's not necessarily true that what works in the UK is going to work in China. There are very strong players in the Chinese market, and China isn't particularly behind in any one big area. So it's the niches where EU SMEs are doing very well. Be present in the market. A lot of companies want to do business in China and maybe just kind of speculatively look at the market, but expect, as per other markets, that it might be okay to operate from the home country. I would generally say in almost all cases that this is not a good way to move forward, and you really need someone on the ground, a local person preferably on the ground, who really understands the market and who can go and have face-to-face meetings with the companies you want to deal with. You will need to partner with local industry leaders. Could potentially be less so in the free trade zones. Again, this is something that will become clearer over time. But I would still say that in technology in particular, you're going to need to partner with very strong industry leaders in your industry to get, for example, the kind of government support, to get the recognition and what have you that you need to do well. IP and due diligence, this is a simple one, of course, across all industries, but in particular in technology, copyright, design patents and what have you, making sure that you hold all of the IP in your part of the company, for example, when you sign into JVs, very important aspect. One key area that's been successful for some companies is third markets cooperation. Excuse me. So whether that be in the home market of the company or in another market, working with the big Chinese giants on their going global strategies is a good way to start producing joint solutions and developing joint intellectual property that can then actually be brought back to the China market. One example that we've briefly touched on today is the example of Newell. That's a company that started working with Huawei in the UK and ended up getting bought by them, and those solutions being brought back to the Chinese market. So cooperating outside of China and then coming back into the market is a key way to be successful here. Research and development projects, as I said, China's really keen to learn about all kinds of areas of technology, and anything to do with technology training and tech transfer are really big areas of opportunity, and it's worth focusing on them. M&A investment I've covered with the Huawei and Newell example. This is a very real opportunity. There's a lot of Chinese investors here, a lot of big Chinese companies who need small European tech, and there's an opportunity to get investment. Make sure that whatever business you're in, work out how to tie it into some of the SEIs, the strategic emerging industries of the government's overall plan. Talking in that kind of language will go a long way when you do business in China, to helping the local governments, helping big companies to understand why this is a very important technology and service that you offer and how it's going to help them. We spoke briefly about the opportunity around the Chinese giant supply chain and indigenous innovation. So some of the Chinese companies are looking to move into the space left by foreign companies that may or may not exit because some of the new changes in policy. So supplying into that supply chain is a very big opportunity. And then finally, operating in an open IP environment. We've all heard about the previous difficulty, I might say, of intellectual property in China. A lot of small companies are worried about that. My basic advice here is don't worry about it. It's not wholly different from working in other markets around the world. And it is possible to operate here perfectly well in the existing IP environment. But operating in an open IP environment where you actively share some of this core IP with your partners in China will go a long way to successful corporations. Finally, I've just put on this slide here a number of resources that you can look at just to get you started. There's a lot more, and there will be more and more on the CBBC and EU SME Centre websites. And you can also, of course, get in touch with us for any further information or questions that you have.
Thank you, Kirk. We are receiving a lot of questions. It will be impossible to answer all of them, but of course, you will find the answers in our website. Very briefly, if you can answer two questions. One is from our audience, what are the trends for the data centers in China?
Okay. Yeah, this is a huge business in China. So China's building a huge number of data centers. There are very strong Chinese players in this market, though. So the big overseas data center producers, the companies interested like IBM and what have you, they have previously done big business. It is becoming more difficult because of some of the secure and controllable policies that have come out. I would call it overall a booming market, but you do need to find your particular niche. A lot of areas will not be open anymore to do with perhaps some of the government industries or SOEs. But nonetheless, of course, there are other big companies that need these data centers.
And also, every day we heard that China and Chinese companies are doing heavy investment outside China. Also the ICT sector, and if that is true, how can European SMEs benefit from the investment in Europe of ICT companies from China?
Sure. I mentioned the example of Newell. That's a very straightforward one where you just start working with a Chinese company and they like to buy the company. That is a bit of a trend. Chinese companies do like to buy in core niche technology to improve their own solutions. And they are also investing heavily in their third markets operations. So Huawei is becoming very big in the UK. It's looking to sell mobiles, network solutions, and what have you. And of course, operating with them in your home market would be quite a different story. You would look to the expert perhaps in the home market to understand that. I wouldn't say that Chinese companies operate very differently in third markets than the local companies would do. Nonetheless, a huge opportunity for EU SMEs is that by working with them in your home markets, you do get to build a relationship with them, and there's always the opportunity of them bringing those jointly developed solutions back into the definitely much bigger and potentially more lucrative Chinese market. And that's really, that goal should definitely be on the mind of any small company in Europe working with the Chinese companies in that space.
And now super briefly, because there are a lot of questions about which is the regulatory environment for cloud service companies. If it's they are on the restricted list of cloud companies offering services on the cloud now can operate freely in China, or which type of difficulties they might find.
Okay, sure. It's very straightforward, though, actually, is the thing to say. Yes, there are restrictions. As I said earlier, the key point to remember is you probably will need to work with a partner, and really the key aspect is how to build a business model that makes sure that your core IP, and let me suggest in cloud services, that's probably to do with monetizing the data that's collected from the users of these cloud services, for example. In terms of monetizing that, making sure that you hold that IP whilst at the same time complying with some of those regulations. I won't be able to give a lot of detail on the specifics of that now, except to say that there is a very clear specific list about what is and isn't a restricted industry in China. And in cloud, there are aspects of, there's an internet content provider's license that you'll need to get. And that has been available for foreign companies, as I understand, in the free trade zones. But as I said, that's a very new thing, and the effectiveness of that is yet to be proved. But we have seen small companies doing that. I think Amazon is looking at that kind of thing in the free trade zone, and in other areas it's generally not. But I wouldn't say that's a reason not to look at coming to the market. The key thing for me is just making sure that the business model that you create with your Chinese partner makes sure that the really important core IP stays with you, and then you can allow the partner company to run a lot of the cloud services and comply with those regulations.
Thank you very much, Kirk. There's no time for more. We have a lot of questions that we promise will be responded in our website, or you have the opportunity to ask directly the experts of the EU SME Centre. Before we go, give our warm thanks to our expert today, Kirk. Thank you very much. And also to our audience, please do not forget to fill your feedback form, if you're so kind. That will help us to improve our webinars. And let me remind some upcoming activities we will have very soon. The publication of the ICT sector report, which is connected directly with the webinar Kirk delivered today. So there you will find more in-depth information about the situation of the market, some trainings and events, the global ready leadership, developing your global mindset. And also for those of you in Europe, EU SME Centre will be in Milano. So we will have a booth from June 8th to 11th. You can, if you have the opportunity to visit Expo Milano, we will be there. And for those in Beijing, we will have the SME conference very soon, June 24, which will be very interesting for all of you. Thank you very much, and we look forward to have you in our webinars in the near future. Thank you. Bye now.